So for this session, I'll just start off with a couple of questions, and then we'll open the floor to Q&A from the team here. So in 2010, the UAE launched Vision 2021, an ambitious strategy. And in order to translate this vision into reality, the country identified key pillars that would become national priorities. And with a population of 10 million, an inherent understanding that youth is our future, it's no surprise that a first-rate education system and enabling a competitive knowledge economy are at the heart of the nation's efforts. Could you tell us a little bit about the United for Knowledge approach here?
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me. You are right. I've been around 5 countries in 1 week, so please excuse me if I look jet-lagged or tired. But I wanted to make sure to come here, to be honest. It's always very refreshing to have an open discussion with a set of highly intellectual people. It keeps your mind going, especially when you go into government, you want to have that debate. But before I answer your question, let me put it into context. When it comes to education, the UAE was a latecomer. And when I say that, I'm not talking from a global perspective, not even from a regional one. It's a very well-established fact that, for example, in the region, countries like Syria, Jordan, and Egypt were well-established. In fact, with economic activity in the region, we sourced teachers from these countries to teach the local population. I'm talking in comparison to the GCC. The UAE was also a latecomer. In 1971, for example, when the UAE was first established, about half the male population and only 1/3 of the female population were literate. And I'm talking about basic reading and writing. So that, to me, is a phase that I label as the inception stage. We struggled a lot. In fact, during that time, people, including my late father, were paid a stipend to go to high school. If you had a secondary degree, grade 9, you would get a job. You won't be unemployed. If you had a high school, you would be getting a well-paid job. So in fact, if you had this Tomouh event back then in the 1960s, you guys would all be high school graduates. That was the level of the crème de la crème. And then the transition moved on from the inception stage to what I would call the empowerment stage. So the government really wanted to empower the local population to really build and upskill them, build their capability. So my father was through that stage. He went to Egypt to study medicine. He became a dentist. And when he came back to the UAE, he established his first clinic. He wanted to practice his profession. But into his second year, he got recruited in the military for military services. He became on the administrative side. And decades later, when he retired, I asked him a question. I said, Dad, what would you regret? This is a man who was in charge for difficult situations. Even during the Kuwaiti invasion, he was head of medical supplies and head of Zayed Hospital. And he told me, I regret one thing. I regret not being able to practice my profession. So that puts into perspective how scarce the resources were. So even if you were well-equipped, you had bigger calling by the government. And then that phase continued on. In my opinion, it went for about 3 decades. We saw the introduction of the first university, UAE University in Al Ain. And then later on came Har College of Technology, which was a polytechnic institution, Zayed University, which was predominantly female and humanities, and it progressed. Up until the 21st century, we moved into the third stage, from empowerment to what I would say globalization and global competitiveness. And something interesting started to happen. We started witnessing global institutions having local presence in the UAE. Names like London Business School, Paris Sorbonne, NYU Abu Dhabi, even partnerships like Muslim Institute with MIT. And you also saw competition as well within the local population, within the people living in the country. We have about 150,000 students studying in the UAE higher educational system. 40% are non-nationals. So we have a huge competition globally within the UAE. We're actually ranked first when it comes to, international students. Also within the local population, we talked about only 1/3 being literate of females. Today, female participation, the ratio of female to men in higher education is highly skewed towards female. is 71%. So there's also competition, gender competition. So that phase, I think, is the third phase. So all that I've described right now is only one pillar of the United for Education, which is the first pillar focusing on human capital development. The second pillar is around building a sustainable and a diversified economy. And on that front, I think Dubai was first. I am from Dubai, so I'm naturally biased. Back in the 80s, Dubai was running out of resources. So we had no choice. We had to diversify. And Dubai not only diversified, but also went fully competitive. When Emirates Airlines was established in the late 80s, the policy for the UAE as a whole was open skies policy. Now, if you mention open skies policy to any policymaker globally, they would grind their teeth. You're exposing your industry internationally with no limits. But we went with that. And today, alhamdulillah, Emirates and Etihad are some of the best carriers globally. And that also transcends across the different sectors that Dubai specifically went into. If you look at hospitality, we have over 12 million tourists. If you look at logistics, Dubai Ports operates the best operations globally, and other industries as well. So diversification began through Dubai because we had limited resources, and then transcended as well to Abu Dhabi. Abu Dhabi was more industrial focused through different companies. The company I worked for, Mubadala, is $70 billion. Today it's merged with IPIC as well. But it went intentionally into new sectors, into aerospace. So even though Emirates was on the travel side, Abu Dhabi was on the manufacturing side. So there are composites being manufactured today in Al Ain by Emirati women on the shop floor that are being installed on Boeing and Airbus aircraft. So Abu Dhabi went into industrial diversification, aerospace, ICT, healthcare, renewables, and many others. That's the second pillar. The third pillar, which is actually a smart one, it revolves around building a knowledge-based economy and being productive. Now, if you look at the global context today, everybody's talking about the evolution of artificial intelligence, the impact of automation. In fact, there's a very well-known study by Oxford that studied the US market specifically. It scanned, I think, 702 jobs. And the outcome was, within the current industry in the US, with the level of the evolution of AI and automation, 47% of the jobs would become obsolete. And that number actually varies in the UK because the UK is a bit more creative. It's not very automated and industrial sector, but more or less it's between 30 to 40%. So the UAE's demographic is very specific. The majority are non-nationals. So we have the liberty of designing our human capital to ring-fence it against this change. And we do that by focusing on high-value jobs that would not become obsolete in the future. In fact, some of this has already been started. Last decade, the tram system in the UAE, the Dubai Metro, is actually autonomous. There's no driver there. In Masdar City, the company I used to lead, 2011, we had driverless cars in Masdar City. So we're already starting to invest in technologies that are actually cutting edge and that require a high level of R&D. We talk about emission to Mars. We talk about 3D printing. We talk about Hyperloop being installed. So these are all high-tech industries that we know would require a high level of human capital development. And if we really train our people to really focus on these jobs, we protect them from the impact of the fourth generation industrial revolution. So I can talk forever, but I'm trying to summarize.
No, that's exactly what I was going to ask about. So is my mic on? So with the fourth industrial revolution, all countries around the world are trying to figure out how they can manage or how they can balance progress in terms of technology and at the same time make sure that their labor force continues to be functional and adding value to companies, people employing them, and to the economy as a whole. Mm-hmm. So what has the UAE done to support and to nurture the competitiveness of your people, all things considered, regarding the Industrial Revolution taking place?
I mean, competitiveness to me is a culture. And when you talk about culture, whether you talk about a startup company, a Fortune 500, or a whole nation. In my personal view, it's a projection of the personality of the leader. And His Honor Sheikh Mohammed Barashid, we all know him, he's highly competitive. He truly believes that human capability has no limit. If you stretch people, they will deliver. You just have to give them a very stretched and aspirational target. Again, that first started with his role as the ruler of Dubai before he was appointed prime minister. And Dubai was really competitive. I mentioned Emirates Airlines, logistics, so competitiveness is very much built in our DNA. But when His Highness got a federal role, that was also transcended on the federal institution. The UAE government today is run like a private sector. I've moved from Mubadal and Masar to the government. I can tell you, I have very strict KPIs. I'm being monitored on performance. And these are all linked to global competitiveness rankings. So I have a target on enrollment in postgraduate studies. I have a target on making the foundation course, which is a bridging course between high school and university, to be zero in the next 4 years. So all of these targets are built on global competitiveness indices. So competitiveness, to be honest, is really in our DNA. Going back to the point around fourth industrial revolution, I think it is a fact, it is happening, but I think as with anything, sometimes it's a bit overblown. If you look at historically, if you look at labor over the past decade, it was very manual. And you can see people evolving into higher jobs, being somebody, for example, putting together or assembling automotive parts. Now you're an operator operating an equipment. So the evolution of the human species right now, from a hunter-gatherer back to the caveman, all the way now, you've always been in a steady move to higher value jobs. That's very natural. The only thing that's worrying people today is that there's a big jump coming up unexpected. And how do we deal with that? And I think the UAE is very well positioned to take that challenge across.
Great, thank you. Any questions from the floor? Yes, table 2.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Extremely interesting and inspiring, and I think we always, within the GCC, probably the Middle East, look up into UAE and what they've done, and we follow you. My question is, Paul, I know you brought some of the really brand name in education institution to come and work and operate from within the UAE. My question is very simple. How do you incentivize them to do so? Is there any specific incentives, or how do you do it?
It's a good question. So there is some form of active incentives. So for example, when you look at this Paris Sorbonne model at NYU, Abu Dhabi, offering the land was there. There's also a scholarship being provided to maintain that scale. The challenge we had, though, was competition. So the mother campus is always worried about you taking away part of their, cannibalizing, if I should say, their own sales. But you do it in a different way. You offer it to people who are actually could not otherwise go global. So offer scholarships locally. London Business School, for example, as far as I know, made the conscious decision by themselves to come to Dubai, at the Dubai Financial Center. Dubai has proven to be a hub when it comes to financial services. And you can look at all of the big names are actually centered in Dubai. So it makes perfect sense to be in Dubai because of its strong presence in the financial sector. Plus also from a logistical perspective, Dubai is very well connected. I can never underscore how well connected it is. So if you look at the program of LBS, you spend about 3 days on the ground every month. And if you look at the cohort, it's very interesting. You have people from Japan, Malaysia, even from London, by the way, who chose to come to Dubai. So the combination of the industry being mature and the combination of the connectivity to me was a natural choice for LBS. LBS actually started, I think, just before the recession. And I've met their main chancellor in London. He told me this story. He said, look, Ahmed, when we invested in Dubai and the recession hit us, we had a big debate. The board was thinking of closing the operation, but we decided to go through with it. And today, Dubai campus is the second largest one after London. So I think it's a combination of a pull factor where we incentivize them, and it's a combination of the right opportunity. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Table 1.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your great talk. Noura Mansouri from Saudi Arabia. My question is, UAE always seems to raise the bar, especially for the rest of the GCC countries. So what do you think, in your opinion, are the impediments that that the GCC countries face to progress, like the UAE? And if I ask you more specifically, especially given the vision of 2021 in the UAE, if you were tasked to improve Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030, what would you add or modify?
Can I answer that after I retire? I mean, look, there was a big event called Khulwat al-Azm between the UAE and the Saudi counterpart to really problem solve and look into how can we jointly develop the two countries. Saudi Arabia is actually very strong in many areas that Dubai is not so strong, or the UAE as a whole. Let me answer this broadly speaking. I think the challenge we have today, at least in the UAE, not maybe Saudi Arabia, is that to some extent, there's a very strong sense of entitlement. And the government here was able to remove that completely. There is zero sense of entitlement. You have the opportunity, but you're not entitled to anything. You're not even entitled to keep your job. And I think this mindset is very important, that you have to work for it. And also, the UAE is quite different because our population is small and the opportunities are big. You need to be very inspirational. A lot of people were very skeptical when the UAE announced its mission to Mars. Very skeptical. But you're trying to build an industry. You're putting a very high aspirational goal. You're building your satellite capability around it. We actually introduced a program in Masdar the moment it was announced. So you are preparing your generation for a highly aspirational target. So I think it's A, removing a sense of entitlement, and B, having a very aspirational goal. And thirdly, I think it's just having opportunities open. Today in the UAE government, what has happened is that no matter what your ethnicity background is, no matter what your emirate is, if you deliver, you get the right responsibilities. It's purely based on meritocracy. I never knew anybody from the royal family. I can tell you this. Maybe in the empowerment phase in the 70s, 80s, you would have to have a specific background. An emirate from a guy from Dubai might not be able to get a high-paying job in Abu Dhabi. There's sibling rivalry, tribal mindset maybe, but that has completely disappeared. And on top as well, women empowerment in the UAE is very strong. I think Saudi Arabia has a very great potential when it comes to women, a huge potential. Again, so these are the three factors that I think would help. I can answer the rest of it when I retire, but that's the political answer.
Thank you. Another question from table one.
Hi, my name is Usair Musa from Saudi Arabia. My question was this, so you've talked in your speech how UAE has led the way to standardize industries globally, right? So good examples are the airline, the logistics. Are there any plans to sort of standardize education as well, whereby UAE gets to a stage whereby they start exporting their education system into at least nearby regions, right? So for example, currently a lot of people follow IGCSE, which is the British standard. So are there any plans whereby we have a GCC standard which UAE leads and it gets exported into other GCC countries and maybe other countries in the region as well, Middle East, like for example, Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan?
I think that's a very interesting question. When you talk about education, when you talk about human capital development, you can think of it as an industry. For example, in the UK, if my memory serves me correctly, I think it's the second biggest export in the UK. I don't think today the focus is to export that industry right now, but it has started unintentionally. So if you look at, for example, the AUS in Sharjah and different institutions, there's a big number of GCC nationals studying in the UAE because A, it offers a decent level of education, and B, it's a different experience, in the UAE. Are we there to compete with the Harvards, the Stanfords of the world? I don't think we're there yet, but I think it's a clear progression. I'm a very pragmatic person. There are some countries around us who have chosen to get the creme de la creme in a very small population. You need scale. I don't think the UAE has the scale today to have top-notch institutes, like 10 of them in one country. So I think the presence of these schools is good enough for today, but our focus today is nation building. Education today is a tool for us to develop our country. It's not an industry yet, but having said that, it has evolved. By the way, today, as we speak, from the 150,000 students, only a third are in federal institution. 2/3 of them are in either fully private or semi-government. So the private sector is already playing a big role in the UAE, but today it's predominantly serving the residents in the UAE. KHDA, the local entity in Dubai, has a clear target to attract international students, and they're doing quite well. So it might be starting today at the Dubai level, but on the federal level, it's still a local play when it comes to education.
Great.
Hope that answers.
Great questions. I'll come back to you. The table in the back.
Abdullah Al-Marzougi from Mubadala. Thank you, Your Excellency, for a great speech. My question is about the focus in education on certain fields. So, as you've seen in Mubadala, you see a lot of students or a lot of fresh graduates who graduated from certain fields, but they tend to move out of their fields into business-oriented or investment-oriented fields. And my question is, what are the initiatives that are being taken to make sure that opportunities, attractive opportunities, are created to ensure that the future students do move into more scientific backgrounds, for example? And I'm sure you've seen a lot of examples in Mubadala where...
So first disclosure, this is not a planted question, even though I was in Mubadala and I know Abdullah. I am a living example. I'm a telecom engineer. I came back to work in academia, and I did work for 2 years. But personally, it wasn't my cup of tea. Back then, I was focused on research. I had a patent, I had papers, but the industry was not developed. So I moved away, and I moved into consultancy, into McKinsey, and then into Mubadala, and you know the story. Let me reference back the previous generation. I mentioned an example of my father when he was a dentist, but he did not get a chance to practice his profession. And that was mostly driven by the strong demand. So he was called for a managerial role. Today in the UAE, we have plenty of opportunities. And even when it comes to me personally, when I recruit my team, because we don't have the best experts in education, I pick somebody who's switched on, smart, and has intellectual capability. Today, we have to have a dynamic pool. You have to be able to move from one sector to another. In fact, that was the main reason why I moved into consultancy. Because when I moved there, the first study they gave me was in telecom, and then ICT, which is quite, and then I moved on to oil and gas, financial services, and that developed in me the skill set to hone my transferable skills. Whether you're running a ministry, a renewable energy company, whatever it may be, the basic skills are almost the same. You need to, A, be able to entrench yourself in the industry, be able to learn it quickly, and B, pick up the opportunities and the challenges. So back to your questions, what is the UAE doing to ensure that the right talent goes into the right jobs? We do have right now, we're introducing a metric where we say not only employability, but who gets employed in their own field. So how many engineers are actually in their own field? Now, don't get me wrong, I don't want to focus on STEM. I am an engineer, but a big believer in humanities. So I don't have any concern for engineers who go into managerial positions because they add that angle. You need a combination of people from business and engineering and other backgrounds to be able to give you all perspective to the solution itself or the challenge itself. So in simple terms, we are starting to track it. I think giving the breadth of opportunities, there will always be room for people to move around. And you don't want to be like certain countries, like in Asia, for example, in Singapore. They've engineered manpower planning on a national level. They were able to focus on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and maths, until they realized later on that they're missing the creativity part. Same thing happened with Japan as well. So for me, I'd rather keep it natural, and as and when the local population grows enough, it'll be a natural progression. Thank you.
Some other questions. The table over, I can't see your number. The third one. Yeah, the gentleman with his hand up. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Ahmed Fikri from the UAE. I have two questions, if I may. First, looking at the future of higher education, and with massive online open courses, with MOOCs, with virtual reality, where people don't have to go to the lab, they can do experiments from their own bedrooms. Do you still see higher education continuing to have this very structured 4-year bachelor's, 2-year master's, 4-year PhD, or is that changing soon? And is the UAE going to lead that change? On a more personal basis, obviously someone like you, a great achiever with wearing multiple hats, very busy, managing a lot of great responsibilities. What do you do? What helps you stay energetic and focused throughout your days?
So I'm trying to get suspicious because I know him as well. So, so on the first question, when it comes to matching the evolution of education, I'm the first to say we are lagging. We don't have enough online courses. I think the education system was built on a certain culture and mindset. I'm not going to mention how, but that mindset still prevails. And part of my strategy that I'll introduce, inshallah, the next couple of weeks is to focus on e-learning. Today, the federal budgeting is built around the number of students. So when I fund your university or HCT or ZU, it's actually based on the number of physical students attending. So it's almost input-based, 100%. We're changing into an output-based, saying, let's look into your employability, let's look into other factors on your research patterns and so forth. We're moving less from the input-based. And with that model, you can actually facilitate e-learning, so you can actually have fully online courses. I don't think we'll reach that today, but at least we're imposing 10 to 20% of these courses. We're forcing them to offer them online. When it comes to massive open online courses, the MOOCs, these are micro programs that students can log into and self-develop themselves. You can argue and say, I can package and get an accreditation, but the issue we have here in the UAE, we're very much obsessed with testing. We're obsessed with getting somebody into the room and filling in a paper, right? So if you do an online course, how can we verify that you actually passed it? So we're still in that mindset. I'm trying to evolve that by imposing online courses, and that will happen very soon. The second part, I can't answer because I don't feel refreshed most of the time, so I can't answer that. But I think, look, when you're a busy person and you have children of your own, they actually remind you of the bigger reason of what you are doing today. Actually, when I was appointed minister, my eldest son, Khalid, who's 10 right now, was actually disappointed. He was very happy with my role as CEO of Masdar because it was very sexy, very flashy. He would tell his friends, my father is saving the world, renewable energy. When it came into education, he thought it was a boring job. But then when I explained to him what are we trying to do, and the nation building of things, he started to get more excited. So I think what really energizes me is when I look into my kids and look, I'm doing something for them. I'm trying to fix the system for them when they grow up. That, I think, is what keeps me refreshed, besides the coffee.
Fantastic. Khalid?
الحقيقة it's so quite refreshing to have someone like you leading higher education in an Arab world. I think this by itself is a clear message to where higher education. But I believe leading higher education without thinking about K-12 is almost, an impossible mission. So unless you start linking the K-12 education with higher education, or basically start tracking the student from early age, you will only always try to recover someone else's work and try to bridge. The second, the impact of e-learning is coming in a big way in terms of people talking about return on investment for themselves. And that by itself is going to affect higher education in the more developed countries like United States. And this may make our countries more attractive in the future for education, because it will not be easy for for institutes in the United States, for example, to sustain their operation. The cost is rising, and the e-learning is becoming much more smarter, easier to, and even from a point of quality assurance is also possible now. So it's a more conventional question, but it's something about return on investment for education as seen by the individual. How do you address that?
So let me answer the first part of your question around K-12 and schools. You're absolutely right. If you map out the intellectual development of any human being from zero, or even they even say something -0, which is when the woman is pregnant, that development actually, the impact you have reduces with age. So the impact of a good teacher in year 4 has a much bigger impact than somebody in postgraduate studies. And to answer that, within the cabinet reshuffle last year, 2 things happened. Previously, there were 2 ministries, education and higher education. They were merged. The purpose of that was the following. It is very simple. Today, a big proportion of our students graduate from high school, but are not ready yet for higher education. So we bridge them with a foundations program. And historically, remember the KPIs I mentioned? So His Highness put a KPI, and it was on higher education. Guys, you need to be responsible for not having anybody go through foundation. And we'd ask, why would you put it in higher education? It should be with K-12. And the reason is as follows. So higher ed says, K-12, it's your fault you're giving us weak students. K-12 says, you're graduating lousy teachers. So it's a vicious cycle. So what happened was, we got merged together, and it's one target to really upskill the students. There's a huge educational reform. The curriculum for this year was completely changed. You've seen a number of things happen. One, we were adding more English-based subjects. So previously, you would only, if you're in a public school, you would only learn English in an English class. Right now, we're introducing design technology, business, topics that are taught in English to increase your attainment, your literacy in English. In the next couple of years, you'll see more electives being introduced. So we're trying to give ownership to the students, to make them, to own their future and be able to choose more subjects. So I'm not concerned about that. I think with time, that will be bridged. So that's the first gap, I think, which is a transition from K-12 to higher education. There's another gap as well, which is the graduates from our universities into the labor market. There's a study, global study, that says, I think, around 42 or is it 47%, I can't remember the number, so don't quote me, of industry saying that there's a mismatch with the skills and expectations from higher education. So to solve for that, the government introduced a new council that reports directly to the cabinet, headed by His Highness Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed. I'm a member and the secretary as well. All the members are ministers, ministers of education, Minister of HR or Labor, Minister of Economy, and others, and Minister of Youth as well. And the purpose of that council is to exactly solve for that second gap. And we're introducing a committee within higher education with private sector, and we're keeping it open. It can range from just giving us feedback on our students. Global companies that have global operations would hire for that position in China, in India, in the US. They would know what's the gap in the UAE. So just a simple feedback help us really improve our offering. The second part is to be able to have a more active role. And that I've kept open. I'm a big believer that you should not impose anything on the private sector. So we have companies that have offered to offer high-end equipment for free, companies that have offered scholarships, companies that have even offered to fund R&D. So that partnership, I think, with the private sector is extremely important. The second question was around return on investment. Okay. So if you look globally, not only in the US, in the UK, in Australia as well, there's a big shift right now of moving the financial burden to the student. And once you do that, the student expects a return on investment. In the UAE today, I mentioned 2/3 are in private or semi-private institutions. There's about almost 100 institutions available. And if I ask anybody, even if I ask Muhammad and anybody from the UAE, name the top schools of those 100, they would say AUS, Khalifa University, Masdar, NYU, Sorbonne. They'll stop at 7 or 8 names. Ask them what are the worst. They'll be able to mention 3 or 4. then ask them on that 90 institutions, can you rank them? Nobody knows. So what we are planning to do right now as part of our educational reform is to add transparency. So we'd bucket them into 3 buckets, A, B, and C. They all need to meet our minimum expectations, but then the students will be able to tell, this institution's quality is B, but it's charging me so much. So that transparency to the student allows them to have a better judgment, and it forces institutions to offer a good return on investment. It will also incentivize the middle segment to invest more, because now they know if they invest into improving their outcome, they'll be moving into one category up, and therefore being able to charge more. So transparency on quality, I think, is very important, especially given that there's a financial burden being moved into the student.
Khalid, can I come back to you just because?
They're worried about my question.
Assalamu alaikum, Shahad Attar, Miss Saudiya. Of course, we're all very proud that the scales are tipping towards women in higher education. But I'm also a mother of a young boy. And I believe that our education systems are not designed for boys. So my question is, what do you think about that? I also wanted to ask about that I find
Sorry, can you maybe rephrase that question?
Rephrase. So what do you think about education being not designed very well for boys, as we see a general trend of more women graduating from higher education? It's research, and a lot of the mothers here today were discussing that. Some trends that this education system are not designed very well for little boys. Also, my background isn't in education, it's in technology. So I believe that we are sorely lacking in teaching technology, logic, and programming concepts at a young age. How do you expect, when you're tasked with preparing young men and boys for future jobs that are unknown, how we're going to compete with India and China that are churning IT talent very, very efficiently? So 2 questions in one.
Sure. Can I start with the second question? I think you asked specifically on programming, was it? Okay.
Yes.
So we are introducing programming in the new curriculum. I'm not responsible for it, but I can speak on behalf of His Excellency Hussein and Her Excellency Jamila. We're introducing programming at a very young age. Basic concepts of being able to build a certain command, right? And that also transcends all the way to high school. And the country really believes that coding is very important. I can be naturally biased, I'm an engineer, I did coding, but again, we don't want to over-influence that. You want to have a good balance. Again, as I mentioned before, in any society, you'd have to have a good balance between humanities and engineering. So that is ticked off. The first point, or the first question, if I understand you correctly, you said that schools are not very well designed for boys. Do you mean as students or as teachers, meant to teach?
So as schools, there's a lot of research that the way we're designing schools today for young boys and girls to sit very still and to listen. So it catches a very certain specific segment of people who are innately prepared for that. But then there is the stereotypical that boys are more hyperactive. So it begins a whirlpool of boys not reaching to higher education and then getting out of that cycle. So as in higher education, how do you make sure that that tipping point remains stable and balanced between men and women?
Let me talk about K-12 first. I think today there's a misperception about the use of technology. I visited school once because I need to understand what's my supply, what's the supply of talent, how did it look like, and how are they really evolving. In some schools, they said we're cutting edge, we're using technology, and it's basically a PDF file on an iPad. So technology to me is a tool. The smart way, the really impactful way is how to use it in a smart way. How can you give the students access to technology where they can actually express their views? To me, I think it's more about critical thinking. How can you develop critical thinking at a very young age? That, to me, is a very powerful tool. But I'd also like to touch upon a point as well here in the UAE, which is very important. I've mentioned that 71% in higher education are female. And I didn't mention that the best scores, results across the board are always women in the UAE, from grade 6 all the way to bachelor's. And I was very intrigued. Is it because of the gender balance? Is it because of competition? Do women want to prove themselves more than men? But there's also a specific reason for it. If you look at teachers in the UAE, they're predominantly women. Men don't go for teaching that much because A, doesn't pay well, and B, there isn't a career trajectory for it. And also the second element is there's still a conservative segment in the UAE where if a woman, a smart girl, who graduates and wants to work in a segregated environment, the only option is education. So you end up with highly intellectual girls, very smart girls, who teach because they want to stay in segregated communities. So with that access to local Emiratis who are actually smart and very passionate, female students get access to the best teachers as opposed to boys. So I think that, to me, is a bigger challenge than sitting idly, because that is changing right now. We're introducing more interactive tools, but that, to me, is a bigger problem to solve. You can ask me, how will you solve it? We're still looking into it. It's not easy.
Thank you. Yes, Saud, I think. Mohammed.
Mohammed Mekki, based here actually in Dubai, partner at Astrolabs. We're actually KHDA training institute for topics in digital business, and we do a lot of training here. And actually my question comes from that experience of actually trying to work with some of the institutions that you mentioned. We do work with several of the universities because what we focus on is the practical kind of industry angle, if you will, to some of the technology topics. And one of the things that we found in trying to engage with some, especially let's say the federal universities, some of the larger universities, was that they, maybe through different policies, through some bureaucracy, through whatever it might be, they're very self-contained, right? And don't have so much in terms of the connection with what's happening right outside. Which we felt was a shame and something that could really be improved or worked on in the future. My question to you is how, what plans do you have to be able to get some of these the universities to kind of bring down their walls a bit and create a bit more flow of the students into the rest of, let's say, the environment or the economy around in the future?
So this is a very valid point. If you think that you are struggling, as a minister, I'm struggling with them. And it's a number of combination of factors. One is, as you mentioned, the mindset. And this is consistent across the board. Academia, I was in academia, we're very entrenched in our thoughts. The smartest students become teachers, become professors. We think we're the smartest, and we believe we're set in our own ways. So there's also a natural resistance to work with the industry. So how do we solve for it? I'm a very pragmatic person. I think through finance. We are financing institutions today. Today, about 90% of funding is from the government directly. 10% is through projects and working with the industry. So I mentioned the output model. So we can link our funding to, for example, employability in the private sector, to feedback and surveys from the employees. We can link it to partnership on R&D with the private sector. Again, funding, when it comes to academia, funding dictates the behavior of the institution. Because we used to fund them directly, when it comes to research specifically, it was predominantly academic research that's done in a lab in the absence of industry. Because it's much easier, it's easier to publish. And as an academic, the more publications you make, the bigger a chance of a promotion. But now once you link it and you force it, and you centralize part of it on a comparative fund, and you say, look, you're going to get access to this fund if and only if you partner with the industry. And I match the industry's dollar for dollar. Once you do that, then you move into, I would say, late-stage R&D, which is more applied. That's another tool of having academia work with industry. And we've seen that model within Masdar, because Masdar is a company owned by Mubadala. When we first did that, the industry partnership, we worked within the group of Mubadala, the aluminum smelting business, Strata, Aerospace, and others. And it was very interesting. So when we first approached them, we approached Emirates Aluminium, and they get budget from their CSR budget, like go play with it. The biggest component, the biggest cost when it comes to aluminum smelting is energy. And the students were able to improve that by over 21%, saving $100 million annually. So they came back with 5 projects, serious contractual projects with obligations. Same thing happened with Strata, the aerospace manufacturing. When you get an aerospace structure which has a damage, if it's made out of composites, you won't be able to see it. If it's aluminum, it will be dulled. So one of the biggest challenges they have is to detect defects. So what's available in the market is a lengthy process. It takes almost a whole day to scan the structure. The students, again, from their CSR budget, go play with it. They did play, and they came back with a more efficient process. I think it was about 4 hours, and they're now trying to install it. So it started off with, let's say, a forced marriage, because it was under the one umbrella of Mubadala, but now it's moving beyond that. There are even developments on the military side that we have been involved with, and I can't disclose. It's very heartwarming to see UAE nationals working at the capability of MIT level, because remember, in Masdar Institute, the admission is the same admission criteria in MIT. Recruitment of faculty are actually screened by MIT. So you're having MIT caliber in the UAE, and we're seeing the outcome of that. So to answer your question, when it comes to shifting that mindset and enforcing a culture of partnership, it's funding, and it's also, a matter of maturity, and eventually it will happen.
Thank you. So many. Yes, table 6. Tafadhal.
Hi. Thank you very much for a very interesting dialogue. The main question I have is regarding...
Can you introduce yourself?
I'm Tariq Al-Angiri. I'm the country director of IE Business School in Saudi Arabia. You talked about e-learning and how important is that. There is a challenge we hear in Saudi about the accreditation of online universities or universities that offer blended programs. Even if they are an Ivy League university, for example, in the US, or #1 in Europe or in the world by Financial Times in business e-learning. What they did in Saudi is that simply if it's an online degree from outside the country, it's not accredited. How do you deal with...
Same here, by the way.
Yeah, so how do you deal with that challenge? I mean, there are some quite good models there. And there's a big market for that.
I agree. It's a very good question, very controversial. Look, as a regulator, it's always easy to say no. Right? That's a simple answer, to avoid the risk. There are some countries right now, and actually somebody sent me a video clip where somebody called a professor in a specific Arabic country asking about degrees and how can he get them. And she listed all the degrees with pricing as well. So there's an element of fraud when it comes to buying degrees, an element of fraud when it comes to online mills, degree mills. But you can't have a blanket approach to everybody. What we're trying to do right now is to differentiate. Remember, the system was designed locally to protect the local population, to make sure that we have the right people practicing the right jobs and the right professional jobs. But when it comes to distinguishing, I don't think we did a great job. Whether it's on accreditation, so in my personal opinion, to be honest, I would think that universities like Stanford, MIT, Harvard, Oxford have a lot more to lose by giving away a degree that is not rightfully attained than us. Their brand name is stronger, to be honest. So with that mindset, we're evolving into distinguishing top schools and teaching them differently, both when it comes to accreditation and also when it comes to local presence. By the way, I mentioned London Business School. London Business School today is not accredited by us because they're in a free zone. Because we took our guidelines, which were designed for ingrown and homemade universities, and enforced it on them. So we tell them, look, how many faculty do you have residing in the UAE? How many hours do you teach? How big is your library, you see? So you can't really enforce that. So once you moved into output-based assessment, and you say, look, London Business School, by the way, is ranked #1 in Financial Times and #1 in QS, which is the best ranking system globally in business. So if you have an institution which has achieved that level of accomplishment, we need to give them more freedom. We need to allow them to offer online degrees. We need to allow them to have a presence in the UAE, a branch campus in the way that they best see fit. So I think we're moving into that evolution of distinguishing between top-notch institutions and the others. But there is a big issue, trust me, when it comes to online degrees. When I was doing my degree, a friend of mine, who wasn't the smartest pencil in the box, got his master's and his PhD in like 3 years, and discovered later on it was on an online degree. So there is a sense of responsibility and expectation on us to make sure that the right talent comes to the UAE, if it's not national, and that the local population gets the right attainment. The issue is, as a regulator, nobody pats you on the back if you do your job right. But if one degree passes through, that's fraudulent, you're on the hook. So the natural reaction was to kill everything and just be safe. But you're moving more into differentiation.
Thank you. So we'll do 2 or 3 more. Table 4 and table 2. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to ask how you're going to deal with getting students ready for the misleading informations that are happening in the social media, and how they're going to become more tolerant, to be able to understand differences in cultures, religions, politics. So what are you exactly doing for this?
That's a great question. Again, when the cabinet was formed last year, a Minister of State for Tolerance was appointed, Her Highness Sheikh Al-Lubna, and Minister of State for Happiness. And people were wondering, so what are you thinking? What's their day job? These, to me, are strong political messages that the UAE would not tolerate any behavior which is against, ethnic background, religion, and so forth. Actually, the UAE was the first in the region to pass a law criminalizing such behavior. Today, if I have a racist comment against you, based on your race or your beliefs, I can go to jail for it. And that's a first in the region. So the UAE has both a strong political message on tolerance and a strong message when it comes to racist behavior. How do we instill that in our students? We do it by having a large number of expatriates, right? So by having 40% non-nationals, you naturally create that culture. And secondly, we also have something called Tarbiyya Akhlaqiyya, which has been introduced in K-12. It talks about the history. It talks about Prophet Muhammad ﷺ when he had a neighbor who was Jewish and friends who were Christians. It was there was no time in history where we had a full Muslim country. It never existed. They all lived in harmony. We're trying to educate them. We're moving from having them memorize verses of the Quran, not understanding the rational. We're moving more into understanding the tolerance that the Islamic, I won't say state, that's the wrong word right now, the Islamic phase when it first started was in. So raising awareness when it comes to having a Minister of State for Tolerance, criminalizing such acts that don't tolerate, and thirdly, infusing the curriculum with topics around tolerance as well is the way to go. And again, as I said before, the UAE cannot afford to have such secular views. I think if we really want to develop the nation, you'd have to be loving this country and contribute, whether an expat or a national. You have equal opportunities in this country, and regardless of your background. So we cannot afford to be fixated on such things. And that's why the government was very clear, passing a law criminalizing this behavior and instating a Minister of Tolerance. These are very strong messages.
Thank you. Table 4.
Thank you for the speech and the dialogue. Abdullah Ilyas from Saudi Arabia. I'm asking you the first question as a father of 3 kids. Asking myself and wondering every day, how can I prepare those 3 for their tomorrow? And looking at success pattern of the past, the usual answer is, okay, I pick the best kindergarten, I pick the best school and prepare them for the best universities. And then good things will happen. So I'm struggling to believe that this pattern, existing since 30 years maybe, which worked well with our generation here, is still the pattern going forward for our kids. So asking you as a father of your 10 years old son, how do you answer this question for yourself?
I actually have 3 of my own, so I share the same concern.
Great. And I have a second question, maybe just quickly.
I'm sorry, just because we're out of time.
Very quickly. Coming from tech, I have seen a lot of industries and sectors being disrupted. What do you see is the disrupting next thing coming into the sector of education? Thank you.
Sure. So on the second question, I wish you were here in the government summit. Elon Musk would have answered that question for you. But let me answer the first one. I think the best investment you can make in your kids is giving them access to the best education possible. That is the magic formula that I would say would continue indefinitely. What has changed, though, is that globally, we're witnessing movement between different levels of the society. Previously, you had the elite, the aristocrats, who were the well-educated, and there was the clear balance, the clear segregation between them and the rest of the population. And then, as technology evolved, as opportunities became easier, as online learning became available, as countries invested in education, you're seeing a lot of movement from different backgrounds. If you were to do a trend on the most successful people, 30 years ago, most of them came from well-off families, and they were exposed to the best educational system. Today, a lot of them don't abide by that. So there's a de-link happening slowly between your socioeconomic background and the likelihood of your success. And there are many examples globally. But having said that, still, the best thing you could do is educate your kids. And secondly, I think, in this time and age, with what's happening around us, is tolerance. I cannot overemphasize the importance of tolerance, the importance of understanding the other mindset, the importance of saying, يعني أنا في البيت ما أقول كافر ومسلم. We say other religion, and they worship in a different way, and we have our own different way. We try as much as we can to have a more flexible view of other societies. That, to me, would be the best thing you can equip them with, especially given what's happening today. I think, in summary, it's education, it's teaching them tolerance, and it's also leading by example. Kids really look up to what you do. They're extremely smart. My other 2 are twins, Muhammad and Haya. And Muhammad once told me when he was 4, he said, "Dad, I want to be a CEO like you. What do I study to become a CEO?" And he's only 4. So you really create a very strong role model for your kids. My own role model is my father. So be the best role model, teach them well in the best schools, and teach them about tolerance as well.
Thank you. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time, but I can't thank you enough for your valuable insight and your time with us today. One quick note before I send you off to lunch is when you do come back in an hour, and please do come back in an hour so we can continue to move forward with our program, please come back to the same tables that you're already on.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, everyone.